YouTube and Anki is a killer combination that will get you fluent in Mandarin fast. If you're an intermediate Mandarin learner struggling with speaking, then this is the video for you. I really think this will help you overcome your speaking challenges. In this video, I'm going to give you my complete workflow that got me from zero to conversationally fluent in Mandarin in 1.5 years. And it is a simple game of using YouTube and Anki correctly. Now let's get started. So step number one is to find an appropriate video. Now, I remember a few years ago when I was first starting to kind of get serious about reading in Mandarin, I went to the library and I picked up a book that I think it was about South Korea and China relations and the history of that, and I have to say, I probably read it for a few days, and I just could not bring myself to read it anymore because personally I just didn't find that too interesting. But then I switched to crime novels and I found that it went the other way. I had to hold myself back a bit because I was getting so addicted to these crime novels that I'd spend hours reading at a time and the time would just go, and then I wouldn't have any time to study medicine. And the reason was because of interest. So the first point I want to make here is when you're trying to find a video, you want the video on YouTube that you find to be aligned with your interests and something that you're genuinely interested in, because then it will make Mandarin learning almost addictive instead of being like a chore that you have to kind of force yourself through. The second point is this: if you were training for a marathon, would you, on your first day of training, if you've never run before, try and go and run a half marathon on your first day of training? Now, I'd really hope you wouldn't, right? Because if you did, you'd probably do more harm than good. You'd probably end up injuring yourself. And it's exactly the same thing with Mandarin. You do not want to be going on YouTube, trying and finding the hardest Mandarin video there is, and then forcing yourself to sit through it, whilst not really gaining too much from it. It's almost the equivalent of injuring yourself, right? Probably greatly decreasing your motivation. So this is why in general I recommend to my students to pick videos that they can understand most of. And the point of that being that, one, it will mean that you're more motivated and it'll be more enjoyable. Two, it will be easier to learn new words and chunks from the video because you can understand the context surrounding it. Now, step number two is to watch the video once through. The goal at this stage is just to enjoy it and try and understand as much as you can. Going back to my medical school days, if I was learning about pneumonia, for example, do you think it would be a better idea for me to try and get a big picture first, think about what pneumonia is, what causes it, what part of the body does it affect, really big picture overview? Or do you think it would be a good idea for me to go straight into learning, the medical guidelines on which antibiotics you should use in which situation, these tiny details? I'm hoping you're thinking the same as me, guys, right? The first one would win every single time, in my opinion. It's a lot better to get an overall picture. And that's exactly what we're doing in this step right here. Instead of going into the details and straight away looking at what can we learn, we're just going to try and get the overall picture by watching it through once. And then when we do learn new things, the context will help it make more sense. Now, step number three is to watch it through a second time. And this time we're going to be watching this video with the transcript open on the right hand side of YouTube, with the intent of adding Anki flashcards and turning the new points that we've learned into flashcards so we can then use to review and internalize what we're learning. As a benefit, I don't know whether you guys have really realized this too, I've realized that with content, whether that be podcasts, YouTube or reading, if you rewatch or read or re-listen, you'll find that the second time and the third time you'll understand so much more. So I want you guys to go through the transcript thoroughly, and you're going to be on the hunt for chunks that you can add to Anki as flashcards to learn. Now, we're going to be using what I like to call chunk-based closed deletion flashcards, which I believe I've spoken about in another video recently too. Now, I'm going to break down the components of what a good flashcard looks like for me, and these are the types of flashcard that I've been using for years now. The first component is having the example sentence on the front of the flashcard. Then you're going to have a blanked out chunk, so use a closed deletion to kind of blank out the chunk in Anki. You're also going to have a prompt on the front, whether that be in English and Chinese, as we'll see in some examples shortly. And then I tend to put the pinyin on the back for any new characters, or for the chunk if it's needed. If I'm not quite sure of the pronunciation of it, then I would put the pinyin on the back just to make sure that I'm pronouncing it correctly every time I review it. So for example, on 大叔中文 recently, 茶叔 said to one of the guests, 每次你来我们节目 流量就会大增. Okay, so let's say in this example we're going to be learning the chunk like 流量就会大增. Now here's what we'd do in order to turn that into a chunk-based closed deletion flashcard. First of all, we'd have that entire example sentence on the front. We'd then blank out the chunk 流量就会大增. Now I'm going to give you two choices here. If you're more advanced, you can just blank out the whole chunk. If you're less so, what you can do is you can turn it into two smaller closed deletions. So for example, you could add a closed deletion for 流量, and then you could also have a closed deletion for 大增. And then that way, I'm sure it would be slightly less draining every time you review it. And then we'd have a prompt on the front, as I mentioned earlier, to make it really, really specific, as it's not that clear from the context what could be missing. Like, 每次你来我们节目 blah blah blah. Like that could be like there's 无数个可能性, right? There's like endless possibilities. And so, for example, you can put the English on the front, so the traffic will increase massively, the traffic will increase dramatically. That could be our prompt. Alternatively, you could do something in Chinese, like depending on your level, like what you feel is appropriate for this context. And that's something you're going to have to like work out for yourself. So these are actually the exact style of Anki flashcards that like I use myself, and I also make on behalf of my students to help them with their learning too. So you can also do this for sentence patterns. For example, if we had the sentence pattern 还好不然, so I don't know, for example, 还好我赶上公交车了不然就迟到了. Okay, so we've got 还好不然. Right, we can have that example sentence on the front, so 还好我赶上公交车了不然就迟到了. And then we could have a prompt as fortunately or luckily, otherwise. And for this sentence pattern in particular, I would have two closed deletions, right? One for each component of it. You could also, if you're a bit more advanced, just blank out the whole thing, right? It depends on your kind of like how much you can manage with this. I would recommend at the start just having two separate ones to make it slightly easier and go from there. You'd have the pinyin on the back, and that would be like a sentence pattern closed deletion flashcard that I'm sure would work really, really well. But I'm sure you're probably thinking, if you do this loads and loads and loads for every video that you watch, like you're going to be completely overwhelmed by the sheer amount of various sentence patterns and chunks that exist in Mandarin in order to express various different ideas in the language. So how do you prevent feeling overwhelmed? Well, recently one of my students actually emailed me about this, and he was like, well, I'm really enjoying your program. I'm really enjoying learning in chunks and learning various sentence patterns, etc. And I've started, watching YouTube videos and picking out chunks from there. And but I just feel so overwhelmed from the sheer volume of chunks and sentence patterns that I need to know in order to speak Mandarin. And I was like, yeah, that's totally normal. Like I felt overwhelmed when I was at your stage too. Like that's absolutely fine. But what you've got to do is you've got to prioritize. Now I'll share with you now the 3 ways that I would recommend prioritizing in order to make sure that you're not overwhelmed. The first way of prioritizing is prioritizing based on interest, usefulness, and relevance to your life. You do not want to be learning like random stuff that's not relevant to you, because you're going to find that really, really difficult to remember. Like one of the golden rules is that the more you can personalize things and the more it's relevant to you, the easier it will be for you to recall. And also you'll just use it more. You want to be, the words and phrases and chunks that you're learning, you want to be able to be using them often, and that way you're just constantly reinforcing them. So the second way, and this is the way that I shared with this student in particular, was you need to ask yourself, can I already express this idea in Mandarin? So for example, if I had another way of saying 流量就会大增, like if I was an intermediate Mandarin learner, there would be no need for me to learn this chunk. The example I gave to that student was, in Mandarin, there's like 5 different ways of expressing, well, probably more actually. These are the 5 that I could think of for him off the top of my head. For expressing the idea of even if, then, right, this sentence pattern. So you've got, so for example, like 哪怕也就算也. And what I said to him was, as an intermediate learner, you only need to be able to use one of them in conversation. Oh, sorry, give me a second. So as an intermediate learner, you only really need to be able to use one of them well in conversation to express your idea. You don't need to know all 5 and then just thinking in your head, like, which one should I use when? I just learned how to use one of them and then be able to understand the rest. And then when you're advanced and you've had enough input and enough exposure, you'll gradually understand the nuances of the difference between these 5. Then once you're advanced and you're already, you know, reasonably fluent, then you can start thinking about having multiple ways of expressing the same idea. You don't need to be doing that as an intermediate learner. If you've already got some way of expressing that idea, just don't learn it, move on and try and learn new things. And the third one, it isn't really to do with prioritizing, but again, it's a question I get asked like so much, and that is, should you put all your cards in one deck in Anki? And my answer to that is yes, definitely do that for Mandarin. Like, so for all your Mandarin flashcards, just put them into one deck and then set the new card limit. I would say start around 5 to 10 new cards. And then once you're a bit more, you know, used to the rhythm of Anki and you know how much time it's going to take you, then you could potentially move it up to 20 cards. But you know, you could stick at 10 cards and that would be absolutely fine. I think over like the last 5 years, I've probably averaged around 10 new cards a day, and that got me to, you know, a decent level. So definitely don't be scared to just do less cards and not cause loads and loads of overwhelm. So the reason for that is really simple. If you have like 10 different decks for Mandarin, 1, that's really confusing. 2, if your new card limit is 10, then you've got 100 new cards to learn a day, as opposed to putting them all in one deck, setting the limit as 10, and then you've only got 10 new cards to learn a day. That way you're not burning out and you're not feeling overwhelmed. Now, before we go any further on to the next step, I just want to quickly say here, guys, if you're interested and you want to start getting learning with chunks, then I'd highly recommend checking out the link that I've left in the description, which is like my free kind of resource bank, my free email course. It's got like PDFs of 30 really common sentence patterns in Mandarin and 50 sentence starters that I found really, really useful, and so have my students, and also some flashcards to go along with them, and like loads of more of like tips and resources. So definitely go and check that out. It's completely free if you're interested. Step 4 is something that I ramble on about a lot on YouTube, and that is sentence transformations. And this is the idea of swapping things in and out of the sentences that you're learning, so you're not just learning, you know, a chunk or a phrase or a word. You're learning like how to use that, and you're learning almost like whole entire like kind of template of how to speak. So I'm just going to go straight onto the examples to make this make a bit more sense. We had 每次你来我们节目流量就会大增. If we're just going to change that a little bit, we could say 每次何谓来我们节目流量就会大增. And obviously I hope that is the case. And then if we were going to change it quite a lot, so once you're more confident, so you make small changes at the start, then once you're a bit more confident, you could say something along the lines of, I don't know, 每次拍这样的视频流量就会大增. Then let's go back to the other example. A small change would be going from 还好我赶上公交车了，不然就迟到了, swapping to 还好你赶上公交车了，不然就迟到了. Or for example, 还好你赶上火车了，不然就迟到了. Just changing a little bit. But we could change a lot. So for example, once you're a bit more confident in doing this, you could say 还好我们赶上公交车了，不然就错过了今天早上的会议. So you can just, when you're reviewing on Anki, you can make these changes, and then you'll learn to use things flexibly and interchangeably, and then you'll find that you'll use them in conversations more confidently. Now, up until this point, we still haven't spoken much about pronunciation. So here I'm going to recommend that you go and use a free tool, chorusing.com, to quite easily turn YouTube videos into pronunciation practice. What you do is you go to chorusing.com, you stick the YouTube URL in, and then you find the various time points of the sentences that you've added to Anki that you want to practice with, and then you set it as a clip. It's like quite easy to do, and the chorusing.com kind of software makes this really easy to do. And then you can just listen to it again and again and again on repeat and get your reps in of just repeating after it, and that will really help you with internalizing rhythm, pronunciation, and then I think pronunciation also has a knock-on effect on your listening skills as well. So I'd highly recommend you do that. I'm not going to go into a full tutorial today on how to use chorusing.com purely because we don't really have time for that, and it is in general quite self-explanatory. I think they've done a good job of the website. So guys, like I said, don't forget to go and check out my free resources of my flashcards, PDFs and whatnot in the link in the description below. And if you're still not sure what chunks you should start with learning, well, apart from the resources that I've just shared with you in the description, you can also check out this video next, where we'll learn some really, really useful chunks using one word, which I genuinely believe if you master can help you be able to speak confidently thousands of Mandarin sentences. So I'll see you inside.